Are live. We are live. Thank you. We were just dealing with some technical issues, but I think we have them worked out. So this week we're going to be talking about nursing during a pandemic. It's pretty simple. The title says it all. I'm very grateful to Jennifer McShane, who put us in touch with both Elizabeth and Liz, who are nurses on the front lines dealing with this. One's in New York, one's in LA. We're in South Texas, so we're doing good mornings and good afternoons all at once. But technology is a beautiful thing, so we're going to continue to leverage it. And we just are thinking about how can we continue to bring value to everyone. And what we've really been talking about lately, Jesse and I, is the true first responders in our eyes. Because yes, we are both first responders as well, but we kind of have it made right now. Nurses and doctors are really dealing with things in a very different, I guess, I don't know. It's things have never kind of been like this for us that we've experienced globally. And so we just wanted to talk about this and see if we can provide some value to this specific community. And so I would like to welcome both Elizabeth E. and Liz Scazafava. Is that right?
Perfect.
Perfect. That's right. Because I'm a fellow New Yorker. It's in me. And you helped when you sent me that broken down spelling. So anyway, for those of you that are streaming on Facebook, we're going to be streaming on YouTube, but we're asking if you can connect with us on Facebook because you can interact live in real time. Please submit your comments, any questions that you have. I will bring them up on screen and we'll get them addressed. Because we want to make this as interactive as possible. But Jesse, how you doing this afternoon? What's going on with you?
No, I'm happy to join this conversation, especially with the topic being so important. And like Joe mentioned, we've been working with first responders for decades, and we're there and we are heroes in our own right. But it's really you guys right now that are kind of in a battle for history, right? So you guys are the ones that are keeping people alive, keeping people well and safe. And we thought this would be a great opportunity to kind of maybe hear from people that are actually directly involved in it. And also, right, because we talk about mental health, mental wellness, we're probably going to get into that a little bit if we can with you guys. So first off, thank you. Good afternoon, good morning for being here. And I'd like to just have everyone get to know you. So if I could, I guess, start with Liz, if you can just tell me, a little bit about what it is you do exactly, where you work, and kind of your experience in this and what's going on with you.
Sure. I've been a nurse for almost 28 years. I normally work in a PACU, which is, after surgery, we recover patients, but they've canceled all surgeries. And then they were just utilizing us in the hospital as like extra help in the ICU because it started out slowly. They came into the ED and there was like, a few patients, they had the space for them. And then it became overwhelming. Then the ICU became filled with all of the vented patients. And then it would move to another unit where they normally never took care of patients on ventilators. And now all of a sudden that floor had more ventilated patients than the ICU did. So they were using the staff in other areas to help supplement the nurses there because they were so overwhelmed. And then they finally turned our PACU into a COVID ICU. So they had to actually make more beds in the hospital so that we could, take care of patients in our area too.
And Liz, what are your normal working hours or shift? Is it the same? Or did that change?
No, actually, because I'm a recovery room nurse, the hours are staggered because that's the way the OR works. They start early, but they go in later. So my hours vary. Some days I'll go in I'll work 7 to 7, and sometimes might do 11 to 11. So that's why there are some of our nurses do work 7 to 7, and they'll typically come in and have an assignment. And sometimes I'll come in and take over or just to help out and just be there just in case they do add on a case. Occasionally they have been adding on cases into the operating room.
Always a 12-hour shift?
I do 12-hour shifts, but luckily I recently went part-time, which is like a lifesaver in this situation. Because then, because then I do go in and do extra hours and help out. And then there are nurses who work full-time and they're working overtime. And it's a lot, especially when you have to wear that garb all of the time. I remember when we used to have like a patient who was on contact isolation. It's like, have to put this stuff on and go in the room. Now it's like for every single patient, you're always wearing it. And for hours, it's a lot.
All right, so let's hold that because I have some questions, but I want to get over to Elizabeth and same questions, just a little bit about you, your experience, and what your history and background is in this, and then what you're doing now.
So, hi, I'm Elizabeth. I've been a nurse for just about 3 years, and I work in a medical surgical floor, so just like your typical hospital floor, not an ICU, regular hospital floor. And I'm in Los Angeles. Since the coronavirus has started, we've kind of been waiting here like, okay, the surge is coming. Okay, it's coming next week. It's coming in 2 weeks. It's coming next week. And so far, it looks like we've avoided something like what's happening in New York. So we're just kind of like waiting here, like, is it going to happen? I don't know. So my floor originally took all kind of medical and surgical patients. And once coronavirus started, we converted into the coronavirus floor for the hospital. And initially we did have a bunch of patients. And then it got to the point where all of the patients were either ICU level and need to be ventilated, like Liz was talking about, or they were just well enough to go home. And so they actually closed my floor. So now my job is completely different because I'm going to all the other units to help out, going to the ICU to help out, and our step-down unit to help out. And I don't have a home floor anymore right now. So it's kind of a crazy time.
So it sounds like you were like in a preparation phase. You guys were gearing up and kind of modifying staffing, and you've been waiting for this swell of patients, right? I imagine we've been looking at other countries and looking at other cities waiting, and I would say the same is for San Antonio. We've kind of been there also. But it looks like from both ends of a spectrum, you guys have seen both preparation phase, and then it hits you and you're kind of working through it. And my thoughts are absolutely with anyone that's been dealing with this anywhere. But again, thank you guys for being here. Now that we know who you are and where you're working at and where your experience is with this as it's happening, I'd like to also ask you guys, what has been the toughest thing about all of this? Like, what is the most challenging aspect for you personally? And what are your stress levels like right now?
I think for me, it's once the patients seem to get intubated onto a ventilator, it's rare for them to get extubated. A lot of them either unfortunately pass away, or they will end up like having to be trached, where they take the tube out of their throat, but they make an incision in their neck, and it's like it might be a permanent thing. Hopefully some of them can recover and go to rehab or something, but it's just it's incredibly sad to see how sick people get.
Yeah, I would say two things come to mind right away for me. And one is, as a med-surg nurse in my floor, I was keeping the patients that had an advanced directive where they didn't want to be intubated. And the worst and hardest thing was to see those patients die alone. They weren't able to have their family member with them.
Yeah.
And that's just really hard. The other thing I'd say is hard for me personally is that the way I deal with stress at work is to leave the stress at work. And during this whole pandemic, you can't really leave the stress at work because you come home and just everything everyone wants to talk about is coronavirus.
Right.
Yeah, I imagine that now more than ever, I think all of our independent coping mechanisms are challenged, right? We used to have a way of dealing with things, but we're used to having a quote unquote normal level of stress or anxiety or fear. And for everyone, that's heightened. And, it's different for us, right? We're watching it on the TV. We see the news stories. We hear, about it. And Joe and I talked about this earlier, how it's, it was in other countries. right? Then it was in our country, and then it was in our state and our county, and now it's in our circle of people we know that have got it. But you have the face of it. You're watching people pass away, and that's a very difficult thing for you. Like you mentioned, that this life-saving procedure that in most cases has helped people get better, and sometimes or most often it's not. And then you've also seen people that maybe are choosing not to do it altogether, and either way they're passing on. And you guys are probably the most human contact they'll have in their final moments.
Mhm.
Extremely difficult.
Yeah, Jesse, and I also want to point out, and this is not to assume that Liz isn't having feelings, but the difference between a 28-year nurse and a 3-year nurse, just when Elizabeth was talking, I can see the raw emotion on your face, Elizabeth, and I appreciate that, right? Because it's very similar in the world of law enforcement and first responders with fire, EMS. Everyone comes into this profession with good intentions, just like in nursing, just like in healthcare. There's no doubt that people want to do this for the right reasons, to serve people, to make them well. But then over time, and it's usually this like 3 to 5, maybe 7 years, people really make this like leap into allowing it on some level to almost change who they are. We become it's a spectrum, right? So some become jaded, some become calloused, hardened. Really, ultimately what's happening though is we become desensitized. And nurses, which is why a lot of cops end up marrying nurses, is because they have an equal sick sense of humor. They work the long shifts, overnight shifts. They know what it's like to miss holidays. Like it's absolutely, there's a parallel between these professions. And so I appreciate, Elizabeth, that you are willing to share that emotion on your face. And because I know it's difficult. I can only imagine what you're having to deal with day in and day out in those hospital rooms. And I'm from the comfort of my home reading a lot of these stories and seeing people have to like FaceTime their spouse as they're dying and leaving notes on their iPhone note app to their loved one as they die, and all by themselves. And the only one surrounding them is you guys and girls. And it's just incredibly powerful what you all are doing right now. And I just hope that you're truly getting the appreciation and recognition that you deserve.
Yeah, I will say real quick, in normal times, I consider helping somebody have a good death to be one of the most rewarding and like the greatest privileges of being a nurse. But when I give somebody a good death, having their family there is oftentimes a huge part of it. And I try to spend a lot of time with my comfort care patients. That's a huge part of it too, just be there with them. And in this pandemic, the patient's in isolation, so their family can't come. And then I'm trying to spend as much time as I can there, but I also, I can't be in there as much as I want to because they're in isolation and I need to cluster my care. Otherwise I'm getting exposed to higher viral loads. So it's been really tough for everybody, especially the families, I think.
Yeah. And Elizabeth, if I can just stay there for a moment, and because now, and genuinely, this, aside from the show, part of me and what makes me is my genuine care for people beyond all the things they do and say and wear and have. And so I'm genuinely curious of if you're comfortable sharing, but a little bit about what your outside of work life is. Like, do you have family? Do you have a close support group? Or are you dealing with that all day and then you're going home and you're alone and isolated? If you're comfortable sharing.
Sure. Yeah. I actually was incredibly lucky because my boyfriend and I moved in together just right before this whole thing started. If I would have been living by myself, I think I would have gone insane. But he's a nurse too, so we're able to kind of help each other out through this.
How long has he been doing it?
Nursing, we started the same time.
Oh, there you go. There you go. So you're on the journey together.
Yeah, exactly.
And what about you, Liz? What's outside of work for you?
Oh, outside of work, primarily I've been taking this like choreographed dance class for 17 years. And it's just like,
stand up and prove it.
yeah, I have to hold my phone because my
Okay.
iPad.
Okay.
But
What's your TikTok account?
it's such an amazing class, not only because of the music and the movement and everything. We're learning new choreography all the time, so it stimulates your brain. But then I've been taking this class with these people for that long, so I just miss that part so much. And it's like that was like a release. People know me; they know that it's like that's my pride. I have to get to the gym. I have to get to my dance class, because then everything else, it makes everything else easy, especially when you go to work and things are so emotional right now. It's like I've had 2 people die recently. I just feel bad. I'm like holding their hand while they're dying because I know that their family can't be with them. And they are doing FaceTime and stuff like that, but it's really not the same. It's difficult. But I'm married. My husband's also a nurse. And but he's in the mental health field, actually. So they do have some COVID patients, but not quite as many. And then I have my daughter's married, but she lives in Florida. And then my son is 16, and when you know it, he broke his ankle last Thursday. So I'm nursing him at home.
I love that you shared that, both you, Liz and Elizabeth. Thank you, because I think, self-care is super important. And you're right. While it's incredible that we have the ability to leverage technology the way we do, it's not the same. I was doing a webinar last week. I don't know, I've done like 30 of them in the last couple of weeks, but I was doing one, I think last week, and it was for a group of social workers and talking about self-care. And I was kind of confused when I was asked to do it because I assume they know it all. Just as you assume nurses know everything about mental health or doctors know everything about anything. And it's just not the case. And so I just had a message yesterday that I was appreciative of, because I talk about the power of physical touch and what it does for the human being and the brain, and how this study was done on these 23-second hugs and the amount of oxytocin it releases that lasts like 12 hours in the body. And so this female reached out to me yesterday and said that her husband and kids have adopted this approach in their house, and it's made a huge difference. And so I really genuinely worry about people who are alone, truly, socially isolated, that don't have anybody that they can have that physical connection with, because again, I just worry about the long-term effects of that. So I'm glad you're doing dance class, Liz. Elizabeth, what are you doing for self-care? I'm curious.
Well, I run, so fortunately I'm still able to do that. Just plus people yelling, "Where's your mask?" as I go by. But that's okay. Yeah, one of the things I was thinking I wanted to talk about is, in a weird way, like we've been, where I work, we've been lucky almost, because we have restaurants that are sending us food when we're at work. We have people are writing us thank you notes. And I'm like, wow, like I feel very supported by the community at large right now. And on a regular work day, that's not something that I get. So I almost feel guilty, because I'm like feeling like in some ways that's easier. Sorry, go ahead.
No, I was saying it's the same thing the community is amazing. They're constantly sending, people are making masks, making surgical caps, sending in food and baked goods and whatever. I mean, we're definitely not going hungry, that's for sure.
That reminds me, and I do not want this to go like down political rabbit hole, but I'm curious, because when we talk about masks, and again, I like to believe that most media that comes out is just a portion of the truth, and that there's a longer, more in-depth story to everything. But when it comes to your own PPE, is everything good? Or because again, there's horror stories all over the place of nurses and doctors not having adequate equipment. Are you guys seeing any of that or no?
I mean, we have our equipment. It's the, the way things changed as this progressed. When it first, and I'm sure you've probably heard it, when it first came out, we were initially told that you didn't have to wear a mask when the COVID patients were there, like in the hospital. I, for personal reasons, do not get a flu shot. So I'm required to wear a surgical mask in the hospital. So we were told the only people who wear the surgical mask in the beginning were the people who didn't get their flu shot. And I'm like, I see a bunch of people who are not going to get their flu shot next year because they're going to want to wear the mask. But then it changed. It slowly started changing. And then they said when you're in the room, you wear the mask. Then it became the N95. Now everybody, no matter who you are, visitor, whatever, everybody's wearing a mask in the hospital. And they have everything. The only thing is you won't like walk in and find N95s. You have to go and get one. But I haven't had a problem getting one.
Yeah, we've had a similar thing where the guidelines were changing constantly and the policies were changing constantly. And it has led to some problems because people would not be on the same page. And then you'd be like, well, I need an N95. They'd be like, no, you don't. And that's definitely been rough for sure. I don't want to get into it too much, but it's been rough.
Oh no, somebody's asking just one per shift and they want us to keep them for a while. The N95 more than, right? I mean, it used to be, I think if you wore it in the room, you would discard it. Now it's like we're keeping them, the N95s, for, a while.
Yeah, and I think that's the point of confusion for some people too, is that, what's the shelf life of these after I've been wearing it all day? And are there proper ways to disinfect? And how long does this actually last to where it's effective? And who knows, right? I think one of the things is that everyone, for the most part, I imagine, is doing the best they can with what they have. And, we just have to be hopeful or not, right? I'm a firm believer that everything we think and do is based on choice. And so we can choose to believe that everyone is acting in everybody else's best interest, truly trying to do the best they can with what they have. But I imagine, even with your response, Elizabeth, that there's been some gaps, right? And I'll tell you, it's been the same for us. It's everywhere. One of the biggest challenges is just the fluidity of change. And every day you show up to work, it seems like there's a new policy or guideline that came into place. And you're like, wow, it's hard enough just to manage and do the job. But now we have to change the way we're even operating, which can be frustrating.
Yeah, we're at one N95 per shift as well. And it's crazy because before this, if you were to reuse an N95, they'd be writing you up and sending you for discipline. Everything's changed.
Now, Jen's asking advice for the public to stay safe. And my advice is, wear the mask if you're going to be in closer contact with people. The thing, I actually wrote my own little Facebook post about this. The thing that drives me crazy is the gloves. Is people wearing the gloves in public, because if you go to the gas pump and put the glove on and then pump the gas and then go open your car door and you're touching everything with that glove. In the hospital, when we wash our hands, we put the gloves on, we do what we have to do, we take them off, we wash our hands again, sometimes changing them multiple times with one patient. So you can't just, go and touch doorknobs and whatever. You're just taking that everywhere you go. You're touching your phone, you're touching your keys, and it's pointless.
Yeah, wash your hands.
Yeah, that's it. Wash your hands often.
Yeah.
I think we've covered a lot of things already, but Joe and I were talking. He had actually been mentioning, and our mentor had mentioned to us also, that it's very likely that you guys' stress and burnout and fatigue and compassion fatigue are all maxed out right now. So if there was kind of some type of service, or if we were to offer like a debrief session daily, or like a peer support session daily, if you think there would be interest in that, and if we could have it like an open forum, if if you think that would be, if that's something that's needed, or if you think it's something that your peers and colleagues would utilize.
I think it's a possibility for sure, because, you know, there they go. A lot of nurses, especially in my area, you know, they're taking care of patients. They've never taken care of patients this sick before. It's a whole new environment. It can be very overwhelming that you want to make sure you're not making mistakes because you're giving drugs you've never given before, you know, making sure that you're, you know, hanging correctly, there were correct dosages, and then taking care of the patient. You know, it's a lot of information. It's a lot of it's like, it's just new situations for people, and it's really scary.
Yeah, I think, you know, something that just came to mind for me is what seems similar to this, and Jesse and I both did this, is we, at 18 years old, joined the Marine Corps, and we get shipped off to a war, and then we come back and we become police officers, and the mentality is very, very different, but the idea is that there's this parallel and they try to be the same, but we'll never in this profession reach that level of high or adrenaline that we did in an actual combat war setting. My concern that is just coming to me is that nurses that are new in the game, like Elizabeth and younger, are getting their peak very early on, and it might be to where they never reach this level of, and I don't want to use excitement wrong, but what actually is happening from a neurochemical way of this adrenaline, of this constant like being on and managing and navigating different situations and people. And I wonder what that's going to do to people and the profession, much like I'm concerned about what it does in law enforcement. And that's just me throwing things out loud.
Joe, you're absolutely right, because, and I'm not meaning to scare anybody or say that anyone's scarred by this, but what you guys are experiencing are traumas every day. And I commend you, right? Because I'm pretty sure that in nursing school, there wasn't a class on how to hold somebody's hand while they're dying, right? Or how to be there when no one else is and the person's lonely, dying alone. And I'm not sure, I doubt it. I doubt that there's anything in the curriculum that kind of covers that. And you can tell from a veteran perspective, from a person that's been on the job for a little bit, you guys are both hit with the emotion and gravity of this. And that, in my opinion, makes you guys heroes and rock stars, because no one in the country is doing what you guys are doing. Which brings me to something that I'd like to ask you each, because we've heard about your struggles, kind of the coping mechanisms you had that kind of been taken away, and kind of dealing with things. You know, I know that you said earlier that you used to leave stress at work, and now it's kind of impossible, and it's always with us. But what I'd like to know, if at all possible, if you're going to be talking about this 5-10 years down the road to somebody, what would be something positive? What would be something memorable that kind of lit your heart or soul, that you remember and either you're most proud of, or that you saw something and kind of made you proud to or happy?
I can go first, I guess.
Please.
I've kind of actually used that as a guiding principle during this whole thing. Like in years when I'm telling this story, I want to be able to be proud of how I responded to this pandemic. And I would say the secret positive for me is that I did have the chance to take care of patients that have been sicker than ever before, and I found out that I can step up to the plate. So that's something that I was able to learn about myself.
Excellent. And you should be, right? Because not everyone can do that. I can tell you firsthand. Y'all are doing things that most people probably wouldn't be able to handle. And however you're doing it, I just want to remind you that your self-care is important. Your mental wellness is important, and we're always here for you for that. What about Liz?
I would say, I think the thing most proud is probably just the way all of the nurses have come together, and, you know, we're just working as a team, helping each other out. And, you know, it's really heartening the way the community's come and supported us.
Yeah, I agree 100%.
I, I love that. You know, what's interesting to me is a lot of people are living in fear, obviously, right? We've been seeing waves of it and a spectrum of it over time. It isn't new anymore, right? It's been around for months that we've been hearing about it, knowing about it. And we've seen kind of fears swell, and everyone has their own perspectives or opinions. But what I often tell people is I don't think that in all the fear and media that they're exposed to, they have no sense of how good people are that are trying to fight this and deal with this and keep people safe. And if you look at everything from the grocery supply chain to medical staff to first responders, like to even like emergency command centers preparing for things, like the amount of conference calls that happen daily, like all the things that are happening in the back end from people that are just trying to win this. And I love that there's this sense of a unified and joint, commitment for this. And you guys are at the front of it again. So thank you so much. Joe?
Yeah, I just want to ask Jen McShane's question. So is there any meditation that's being encouraged in either one of your hospitals?
I think they have a little room, like a chapel area room that we can go in and, decompress or whatever. There actually is a conference room downstairs, and I think about it, they have snacks and stuff, and they're playing relaxing music. But I don't really know how often people are getting down there to take advantage of it, I think you go there, you're doing your job. You don't really even have the time, sometimes to just get down there to do it.
That's a really difficult thing, right? Because this is, especially if it's not something that's ever been practiced before. So
Right.
it's very easy to say, hey, we have this here for you now. But if you haven't had it in practice in your life or in your workplace, it may not even be utilized as effectively, right? I really think that this should be something that you guys should be learning about, kind of pushed by your administrations, by your staff. And once you learn about it and how effective it is and what it is, instead of it just now existing. But even then, I imagine you guys are so busy, it's definitely all kinds of challenges involved.
Yeah, I mean, we recently actually did get a lot of supplemental staff. It might be a little bit too late, but because we were so short, because there were actually quite a few nurses that were out sick that had been exposed. So we were down on nurses, and we just got a bunch of travel nurses in. So it might get a little bit better in the next few weeks now that we have more staff.
How about your facility, Elizabeth?
So my hospital actually is big into these kind of things during regular times, and we do have somebody like donated the money to have a staff. They call it a relaxation room, and they have like people. Actually, somebody mentioned massages. They actually have volunteers that give us massages once a month, which is amazing. Of course, we haven't really been able to do that now. We're not letting anyone in the hospital unless they absolutely have to be there. But it does exist.
And do those services get utilized outside of or before this? I imagine.
Oh yeah, yeah.
Yeah. So I guess that's that difference right there, right? Is when you offer something new during the crisis, it's less welcomed than if it was something you already had in place. Another question is, are hospitals doing any kind of organized defusing at the end of your shift or out briefs?
No, not at my hospital.
That would be a great idea.
Yeah.
Well, and so I think that's kind of what Jesse was alluding to, right? Is, we're trying to figure out in our own way as well of how we can help based on what we do. And so we were wondering, and again, it's hard because different shifts, different hours, time zones, 12 hours, all these things, but it would be great if even just like this, but it wasn't necessarily streaming. It wasn't live for anyone to tap in and see, but it was more of a closed group that we could just offer, an out brief at the end of a shift or even going in to set the mindset. I don't know. I think it's important, and I think it's something that isn't done. But my bigger question is, I wonder if it would actually be utilized, because to the point we were just making, it's not something that was done before. And I think the expectation is almost set in, you just show up, you do your job, whatever that means, and then just go home and then do whatever you do. And we know that, the profession of nursing has a lot of the same struggles that the profession of law enforcement has, and so I'm concerned equally about that fact. But I mean, what do you two think about something like that?
I think it could be done, especially in my hospital, the way the shifts are, it's like you give report, but there is some overlap time. So they probably could, I mean, what would it take? 15 minutes, maybe, if they just made it something that they really encourage the nurses to do. Your shift is over, you gave report, now go and, for your debrief, or ahead of the shift, it's something that could actually could happen.
Yeah, I think I think even bigger than that, it communicates a greater sense of community, but it also shows a sense of care from the leadership if they're encouraging this. And I do agree with that time of 15 minutes. It doesn't have to be anything long. It's not counseling. It's just and just like any good debriefing, you don't even necessarily have to participate. Just show up and listen. You never know what you would get out of it. So anyway, it's something that's swirling around. We'll see what happens with it. But anyway, I think we'll get ready to close, because we're about 38 minutes, and I want to be respectful of your time, because you only get 12 hours off. So I don't want to take too much of it. One quick question. Hello to my grandmother. But will you be able to take any time off in the foreseeable future? So how's that working as far as vacation time? Are you getting any or no?
Well, it's funny. Somebody said that I was on another conference call with people from work, and I was supposed to go to Florida in the beginning of April, and then Colorado. Now I was actually supposed to leave tonight to go to Colorado, but I don't really want to use my vacation time now, because there's nowhere to go, nothing to do. So I'd rather save it and use it for when I can actually go somewhere and enjoy myself away from all of this.
Yeah, I actually had a vacation planned for the beginning of June to go to a friend's wedding, which is not happening. And I haven't really decided if I'm going to take the vacation or not. I'm not sure what I'm going to do there. There's really nothing to do.
I know. Yeah. I'd rather save it for, a trip or something.
That's tough, right? If you're going to take time just to be cooped up, it's got to be stressful. But
yeah, it could almost be worse.
Right.
Right. And the thing with nursing too is that, with the 2 or 3 12-hour shifts, I don't know if you work 12-hour shifts, probably, Elizabeth.
Yep.
You can work 3 in a row, get a bunch of days off, and then work 3 at the end. So there's ways to manipulate your schedule if your employer allows you, so you can get stretches of time off in between.
You need that. I hope you guys are getting sleep while I'm on that subject. Jen McShane says, do either of your hospitals use Alexa? I guess Yale is trying to ease stress on nurses so they don't have to get in and out of their PPE. So that's an idea. If you have an Alexa system, that'd be something to offer. Absolutely. Okay.
No, I don't know. I don't know how that would work. I don't know.
It's Yale. Who knows? Aunt Pat, I don't know if she's listening or not, but I'm a big fan of Aunt Pat, who's a longtime nurse. So just shout out to Aunt Pat and all the nurses. And again, a big thanks to Jen McShane. I'm going to have Jesse wrap us here. But thank you, Jen McShane, for helping us find these 2 incredible women that are on separate coasts but doing the same work. And I think being impactful and impacted greatly. And so Elizabeth and Liz, I appreciate both of you taking the time to join us today. But Jesse, what do you want to leave them with?
So just like Joe said, thank you for taking the time to sit with us today and talk. We know that you guys are facing a lot of difficulties, and you just are 2 representatives, 2 randomly pick samples from like across the country. And your stories, right? I think it's just funny because I have the same name, so that's kind of cool. But I imagine that you know people in your line of work that are dealing with the stresses, and they may not even be dealing with them as well as you are. And we can see emotion in your face. We can hear it in your voices when you talk about these stories. And there may be individuals suffering even more or taking it a lot harder than you are. And who knows where they are in their life. So hopefully they're watching and they know that, we care, we're listening. And if there's anything we can do, I noticed that a lot of organizations are trying to do something. And that's where Joe and I are. We are thinking of ways that we can give back. And I think there's more than just kind of sharing stories. While it's powerful, there's more to do. But thank you for this. And I'd ask if there's one thing you want to leave, if there's anything you want the people to know watching or listening, any piece of advice or just something that you want to share before we close. Elizabeth.
Oh gosh. Let me try to come up with something on the fly. I guess what came to mind was just like hug your loved ones.
Okay, that's good.
Yeah, the thing for me, it was just that, it's so hard. I know it's so hard for families not to be able to come into the hospital to see their loved ones at all. It's like they were really limiting it. It's so hard. And the nurses really get that. They understand. And they're there for you. They're like the pseudo family that can't be there for the family that wants to be there, so.
Tremendous work from both of you and from your colleagues. Thank you for all you do and what you continue to do. Thanks for sharing your stories and giving us your time. You are true heroes, and God bless. God bless all of you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thanks for having me.
Thanks so much.
Take care.
Bye.
Bye.